Alright everybody, welcome back to We Play Games. I'm Walker and here we are in Age of Wonders 4 continuing our multiplayer basics series. So today we're going to be doing an update for our tomes tier list. Now this is going to be a combination of all of our tomes. We're going to go ahead and actually build the tier lists without you here, and then we'll talk through all the changes and the way things have updated and whatnot. But for those of you who have no interest in multiplayer, don't worry. This is still going to be very useful for you. Hopefully you'll learn a lot, especially if you're interested in doing auto-resolve only, because that is something that is pretty standard whenever it comes to multiplayer. A lot of people do auto-resolve only against the AI, except in play-by-email style, but I think even there, auto-resolve only, generally it plays better. It slows the game down and forces you to build real armies rather than just cheese the tactical AI into outer space. So if you're interested in, a tier list that's going to help you build something that can survive a whole lot of losses in auto-resolve, then you're in the right place. But let's talk very briefly about our tier list itself before we start assigning things. So our S tier tomes, those are going to be the ones that are just the most ubiquitously powerful. These are very just generically strong. The A tier tomes are going to be those that are also very powerful, but maybe they have some setup costs. Maybe they have very, very particular builds that they go into, but they excel whenever they do that. The B tier tomes are going to be sometimes sideboard tomes. We'll put some things here that are very, very powerful against one specific strategy, but then things that don't generically work as well will probably fit in B. There are also going to be some things that are just doing the same thing as either the A or the S tier tomes, but just worse. There are going to be some of those that we'll see along the way. And then the C tier tomes are going to be those that I'm going to generally recommend against. Those are things that I think if you're using the C tier tome, you're either role playing or you really, really know what you're doing. I'm sure that Morgi and Amikdara actually use some C tier tomes on occasion to accomplish things, but I'm here to discourage you unless you really, really want some role playing from playing these. And then the D tier tomes are going to be those that really kind of don't do anything for you. There are going to be a couple of these in each tier, unfortunately, but for the most part, I think most of our tomes are going to fit into somewhere around the A through the C. We'll see as each one distributes out, because some of the different tomes are a little better balanced than others. So let's kick things off by talking about our tier 1 tome. Alright, so before we dive in on, actually discussing our tier lists, I do want to mention first, I am actually going to read out the names of all of our tomes for each of these letter grades. We did have at least one person who watches these while multitasking, which is, I think, a really great way to spend an hour and a half or however long it is. I end up bloviating about everything. So we will actually, say, alright, so we've got this in each letter grade. But I think we'll also take some time to discuss each of the tomes in turn as we blitz through this. Some of these we won't spend as much time talking about, because some of them, my opinions, largely have not changed since I did the regular tier lists. So if you want to know my opinion on the Tome of Beasts, just go watch that video. It's basically the same thing still. But if there's something new, and here we have the Tome of Alchemy, we will discuss that at length. And then if something's changed a lot, we have the Tome of Necromancy here, we'll also discuss that. But I think it's also important to remember that here with our tier 1 tomes, that you are picking one of these as your first tome. That means that the spell that you get is really important. So here in our S rank, we have Cryomancy, Alchemy, Warding, and Evocation. This is pretty similar to where we were before. I think that Cryomancy is still just a generically incredibly powerful tome. It accomplishes basically everything you need it to. Tome of Warding has taken a slight nerf in the sense that now Tome of Evocation is a lot stronger. There's just a lot more things in the game right now that are weak to lightning damage thanks to the Derelict Workshop that was introduced in Empire and Ashes, and then I just didn't update these tomes. But Tome of Evocation I think was an S tier tome in the Empire and Ashes update, and I don't think anything introduced in Primal Fury knocks it down to A. I think this is just a very, very powerful damage type that naturally lightning damage does kind of slow down towards the end of the game, because there are people who are going to start picking up a lot of it these days. The Tome of Naga transformation is very, very powerful. There are other things in that tome, but Naga transformation is pretty bonkers. But let's talk about the Tome of Alchemy here. So this is going to be one of our S tier tomes. The first thing I think I want to mention about the Tome of Alchemy is that I do recommend against this as your first tier 1 tome. You'll note by just looking over it that like there's no summon here. In fact, if you start on Tome of Alchemy, you're going to get the same experience that you get if you play with Tome of Necromancy as your first tier 1 tome. There's like nothing for you to spend your casting points on. There's an enchantment here with Mysterious Tonic. This is pretty powerful when it comes to scaling. Afflictors aren't bad when it comes to like the first 20-25 turns and clearing the board there. I wouldn't, lean into these too hard because they are a tier 2 draftable unit, but like they're not bad when it comes to early game clearing. But like the real power of the Tome of Alchemy is that it is just like fantastic when it comes to your research. Alchemist Lab is one of the best SPIs in the game right now. It's insanely cheap. It only costs like 60 gold to build this thing, which means it's also really cheap on the production side, and it's also insanely valuable when it comes to this knowledge because it counts not just unique province improvements like quarries and farms and whatnot, but also if you have like SPIs. So Tome of Alchemy is just fantastic across the board for anybody who wants to do research. It also comes with Materium Affinity, and just one Materium Affinity is really great because it sets you up to work on Materium 1. We also have Material Refinery, which does work with the Tome of Transmutation, which is insanely powerful. We'll discuss that later. We get a way to dispel negative status effects in an AoE and then get 2 status protection. In an early game fight, Anti-Magic Tincture basically single-handedly destroys any sort of crowd control strategy out of your opponent. You also have a relatively good siege project here in Fumigation. This one is like really wide in its outcomes. If you use this against somebody who is poisonous, this is a terrible siege project. But against like generic free cities, this is a very powerful tool to have. And then like Miasma is fine. I think the real value for Alchemy is the research itself, which means that like if you're considering doing any sort of research stacking, anything involving like high and high hermits and whatever, then like you should probably be playing with Tome of Alchemy. Like it's just really good. Tome of Warding is another one of these things that you can start with. Just be aware that if you start with the Tome of Warding, that you are going to pick up some problems. You're going to start with the Mark of Invulnerability. We discussed this in one of the other streams where we started with the Tome of Warding. It's really strong because Phantasm Warriors are functionally tier 2 units in terms of their combat efficacy, even with the changes to Ethereal. Now, instead of having the +2 Spirit Resistance and immunity to like almost every single status, we've lost a bunch of our status resistance, but we've gained +2 physical resistance. So like the Phantasm Warriors I think are largely a lot stronger at the beginning of the game and worse towards the end, which is like fine, right? This is a tier 1 unit. It's not going to be good at the end of the game anyway, and so that's a great change for Tome of Warding. But because you start with this spell and the AI doesn't really use it particularly well, just be aware that if you're playing with Tome of Warding, you are taking a little bit of risk on. If you need to turn spells on for a fight because like you don't want to lose everything, be my guest. Sometimes it casts your cultural spell, but sometimes it casts this one and basically does nothing for you. A-tier tomes, beasts, this is effectively still in the same place. Same with enchantment. Enchantment is a little different because now we have a different arrow. So now we have purging arrows instead of seeker arrows, which does make Tome of Enchantment meaningfully worse. But I think that overall Tome of Enchantment is still just like a pretty solid tome when it comes to generating value for you. Sundering Blades is an absurd amount of damage that you can get on the board, and of course status resistance that you can get down on your opponents. So like this is just a really powerful tome when it comes to supporting everything. The Tome of Enchantment Awakened Tools will generate a ridiculous amount of value for you early on, and so like this is something that if you're gonna take the Tome of Enchantment, then you might want to consider it as your first tier 1 tome, just so you can get like this thing going as quickly as possible. But even Spell Tempered Shields is like really good. Like this is a really big deal in early game auto resolves. Getting +1 resistance on all of your warriors keeps them alive a lot longer, and then +1 resistance on everybody else keeps alive a lot longer. We still have issues with Copper Golems die all the time. You can try to get around this with Tome of Evolution, but I would just generally just accept that they die. It's the way of the Copper Golem. And then of course we have Tome of Zeal. So Tome of Zeal, this one I think we do need to talk about a little bit. So you're probably going to get the most value out of this tome by using Fanatical Workforce. This is a very, very powerful spell. Plus 60 production income is an absurd amount of production income, but it does require a lot of inputs. It requires, of course, 45 mana as well as the 45 casting points for refreshing this every 3 turns. So it's like kind of costing you 15 casting points per city that you're trying to use Fanatical Workforce on. That gets really expensive when it comes to the early game. And of course, the bigger problem here is that in order to really utilize all this production income, you need an absurd amount of gold. So if you want to use the Tome of Zeal, then I would very strongly recommend that you look into Fabled Hunters or something that's going to generate a lot of gold for you, because you're going to need like really a ludicrous amount of gold to get the most value out of this tome and for it to actually deserve a spot here on the tier A. But it is really good. Like Legion of Zeal, you can see here that this combines a lot of the other elemental enchantments into one, so you only have to research this once in order to get both the ranged as well as melee damage. And then like Summon Zealot, this is if the Zealot dies, that's a feature, not a bug. Like you don't need to be paying upkeep for these things. They show up, they do spirit damage, they inflict Condemned that allows them to inflict more damage. Like they do what they need to do, which is start fights for you and then die. But it's a really good tome. The B tiers, so Necromancy is our new B tier here for Shadow. I think unfortunately Tome of Necromancy is not necessary in order for you to have a really good Necromancy build. I think that I would still generally recommend it for people because getting access to Necromancers as a tier 2 support unit is actually a really big deal. The Raise Undead does work pretty well with Whiteborn heroes, and getting Whiteborn heroes early for Tome of Necromancy is a really big part of their economy package. Like being able to kill a free city, take that hero, resurrect it with, 50 souls or whatever, and then have something that'll play very, very well with Strengthen Undead, +2 Strengthen that you can always apply to your hero, and generally only your hero at the very beginning of the game, means that your support unit hero is going to put a lot of work in. And then in the unlikely scenario that your strengthened hero dies, Raise Undead can bring them back, and the AI is usually pretty good at that. And then because of the way Necrotic Magic actually produces value for Tome of Necromancy, Necromancers can do a lot of extra damage for you. This goes up to a 90% chance on these sort of single action attacks. It's really better for something like Awakeners. I think that if we get an opportunity to do from Necromancy from on high in single player again, then we'll have an opportunity to show that off, because Necrotic Magic really is very good on like big AoE battle mage units. A 90% chance to inflict decaying in an AoE does a lot of damage. And of course we have our Soul Well down here in tier 1, but this is a problem for Shadow because now they have their tier 1 research post here, and they have a tier 1 research post here, which means that we do not have a tier 1 or a tier 2 research post for Shadow or for anybody really. And so the research posts are a little more complicated when it comes to working them into your economy. You still need to think about ways to do that because you want to always be able to put an academy in your cities, and so that does help the Tome of Necromancy out here a little bit. But there are some issues. The skeletons are not really usable right now. They're just too fragile. They're a waste of your souls. You're much better spending them on heroes and necromancers and resurrecting cities. Necrotize is really good. This is a new spell, and this is a really, really good spell for your auto resolve. But Rotting Explosion is mostly skippable, and skeletons are mostly skippable, and Unholy Leader doesn't really do anything until you get to your tier 2 tome, and you start being able to work with corrupt souls. So this is not a particularly powerful hero skill. Soul Collection is really expensive. They changed it up to 10 souls income rather than 6, which is a big increase, but the big problem with Souls Collection was always just the gold upkeep, and I still feel like I would have rather this been 6 souls income for 15 gold upkeep. That would be a lot easier for most economies to sustain. This is just if you're gonna use Soul Collection, research it as your 3rd or 4th spell off of Tome of Necromancy. Build up a real economy first, because if you cast this before you build a real economy, then all your growth, all of your gold will just go to the souls rather than anything else, and your economy will lag way behind. It's not a bad tome, and I do like Necromancy, but overall most of the value that you're getting here is the Necromancer. Necrotic Magic, if you're really working with it, a pretty good good tactical spell and a research post SPI. Don't worry about the research post not giving you knowledge. That's mostly cosmetic. Like, part of the value of the Tome of Alchemy is that the research post is actually really, really good for your research. Like, this scales up very quickly, but as long as it's a research post, it'll allow you to build an academy, period, and that's like the main value of a research post SPI. And then down here in the other B tier tomes, like Pyromancy is just like a worse version of the other the other types of elemental things, and evolution is, I think that you can get good value out of this, especially in skirmish mod, because it does have some cool stuff going on, but it still is not in a position where it's like really threatening the big boys, and it's mostly playing second fiddle to everybody else. C tier tomes, we have in case I didn't mention it, in our A tier tomes we have Beasts, and then Enchantment and Zeal, and then our B tier tomes we have Necromancy, Evolution, and Pyromancy. C tier tomes we have Rock, Roots, and Faith, and then our D tier tomes we have Horde. So our C tier tomes we have Rock. I went back and forth on whether or not this should be in the B tier because the SPI is pretty good, but it's basically just the SPI. Like, everything else in Tome of Rock is pretty anemic, and unfortunately an SPI alone is not enough to save this thing. And then Tome of Roots is in the same place where, like, it's got the Entangling Root spell, and that's cute against the AI, but doesn't really work particularly well in multiplayer, and doesn't do a lot for you in auto resolve. So, like, it's mostly nonsense. And then Tome of Faith, there is a big part to the Tome of Faith, and this is how I've seen people generate some value out of it. Abbey is really cheap. This is as inexpensive as the Alchemist Lab. So if you just want to build insanely inexpensive research post SPIs, then taking Tome of Faith and Tome of Alchemy together gives you the cheapest SPIs. I would not recommend this to the average player because it does result in you having like hilariously weak early game problems. The chaplains are good, like these do support Dragon Lords and stuff really well, but like, where's your summon, Walker? Where's your summon? If you don't have a summon in your tier 1 tome, you're gonna have some problems in terms of scaling your military up, and then that will in turn have issues for scaling your economy up, because a big part of the game in Age of Wonders 4 is getting out of low tier units, getting stronger units, clearing Ancient Wonders, clearing infestations, conquering other people, and if you don't have a summon, you are going to be way behind when it comes to developing your military, and that's mostly reflected here in these grades. Like, I think the only really surprising thing, or if you haven't played with it, the only surprising thing is that alchemy is so high, but it is just fantastic when it comes to your research. Alright, so here we have our tier 2 tomes. Some of this is going to look familiar. You can see here in our S tier that we still have Tome of Revelry. We'll talk about the Nurse to Scald, but there is something missing pretty obviously. The Tome of Amplification is gone. It and the Tome of Summoning have kind of like switched places in regards to their tiering. That's really, really good. It was obnoxious that you kind of had to take Tome of Amplification as your first tier 2 tome on basically every build if you wanted it to be competitive, because of the way like Amplified Minds and the access to extra world map casting just like skyrocketed your economy that early. It was very silly, and I think that this is a much healthier format overall. And I think that actually with the changes to Scald, I think Revelry is the worst of the S tier tomes here. So let's just go ahead and jump in. We've got the Tome of Fey Mists, the Tome of Constructs, and the Tome of Revelry. So the Tome of Fey Mists, let's actually just like start there. So the Tome of Fey Mists, we did talk about this in our stream with the Tome of Fey Mists, but right now Misty is like one of the most powerful things in the game. It allows you to do 18 versus 6. If you don't know what that means, then go watch that stream. You'll have a good time. It's really fun, and I guess we'll use this as shameless plug. If you enjoy this this content, then watch my single player streams. Don't watch my multiplayer streams. Nobody ever should watch those. Those are just me and my friends that I do for extra content. But the single player stuff is super fun, and I'm having a great time, and I'd love to have you with me. But the Misty terrain abuse is ridiculously powerful and is banned in most multiplayer circles, and so that does weigh this tome back down a little bit, but it's still really powerful. Fey Blessing is a support ability, so it's not like really high priority for your heroes. It can be pretty good whenever it comes to doing crazy buff circus stuff, but like Staves of Mist generally does enough of that all on its own. But it is important to note that like Tome of Fey Mists does play really well on things like Wild Speakers, support units that don't naturally have their own healing ability, because this is a really nice free action for any of your supports to have. And then of course you get mislings. These are people have been showing these off as being crazy overpowered. They're not crazy overpowered, but they are really good. If your opponent does not have a solution for accuracy problems in the form of something like Inquisitors that always hit, or battle mages, or enough scry that like you can just shred infinite evasion, they're gonna have a bad time. If they are trying to take 25% hits against mislings, you're gonna demolish them. And that we did actually see that in one of our multiplayer games with I think it was Zombie versus Yukio, and Zombie just couldn't hit these guys, and they just like tore things apart with Misty Strikes and Fatric, and they are really powerful there. And then of course you have like great extra transformations. Fey Embrace is like mostly skippable. These sort of fixed abilities like on Alchemy, if they're static on the map when it comes to tactical combat, they're not going to be nearly as powerful, but that doesn't matter, because I think that overall the Tome of Famous is just like a very strong tome. There's everything to love about it. Even the SPI is pretty good. Like this doesn't give you as much in terms of its mana, so I mostly only think you need to build this if someone's invading you, but if somebody is invading you, Feywater Pond is really silly. And then of course we have our Tome of the Construct. So Tome of the Construct, introduced in the Empire and Ashes DLC, this thing is really xenophobic. I do want to highlight that first before we talk about the strengths of this construct tome. We do need to highlight the weaknesses of it. If you're trying to play with units that are not your race, or something that you've done a transformation here with Linked Minds, which it's not crazy expensive, 250 casting points, you can do this on like one secondary race if you're doing that, but like mostly you do not want to be playing with animals or undead or dragons, blah blah, because you really need these effects to work. These effects make it so that any of your target friendly construct or linked mind units in a chain get either hastened and strengthened across like an entire front, or they enter into defense mode and gain watchful for one turn. And this can be used on units that have already moved. So what this allows you to do is either like move a bunch of people, get into a bunch of fights, and then cast Cascading Defend and like lock down the front hardcore. Defense mode on everybody in the universe where charge attacks are marginally weaker, but also just like generally harder to utilize, I think is a pretty solid ability. But like this is really the banner for this entire tome, especially now that Scalds have lost their haste. This is like basically the only big AoE haste other than the exhilarating Roar on Dragon Rulers. So this is an insanely powerful tome based off of this spell alone. And then of course you do get Bronze Golems. These are really good against very particular enemies because they have a massive lightning weakness. Let's find a Bronze Golem just to show this off. Bronze Golems with -4 shock weakness have the same problem that Phantasm Warriors do, where like they're supposed to be frontline units that lock things down, but because of this gigantic weakness to a magical damage type and no extra ways to like buff their resistance into outer space other than Tome of Warding, these things can get annihilated by an enemy with lightning weapons, and then your front line just doesn't exist, and then that's a big problem. Then that is a big problem. But like just because the Bronze Golems aren't oppressive doesn't make the Tome of the Construct any worse. This is a really good thing to have, especially if you're playing with Bastions or Exemplars, but even earlier on in the game, +1 defense and resistance on all your shield and polearm units that's not racial. That's pretty nice. It gives you some flexibility in terms of utilizing things early on. And I like the Worker Construct Nexus. I think this is a pretty solid SPI. Just the ability to stack a bunch of things next to it and get value there is really good. And of course the really important thing for the Tome of the Construct is that this does interact favorably with powerful things. The Tome of the Golden Realm gives you access to the Gold Golem, which now is a construct, and so it does get these bonuses in terms of cascading commands. And so like this is powerful early on as long as you can get enough racial units and constructs, and then scales really well into the mid to late game. Not like insanely well, because Gold Golems do still have some issues with the elemental weakness, but this is a very powerful strategy overall. And then Revelry Revelry, we do of course have the nerfs to Scalds, but they're still just like fantastic units, and my feelings overall on Revelry really haven't changed. The nerf to Scalds to make these Bannerman abilities and lose haste does matter, and I think it is meaningfully worse than probably the other tier 2 tomes, but the other S tier 2 tomes, but overall it's still quite good. Alright, so that was a long introduction for some powerful new toys, but they are powerful and you should play around with them. Most of the rest of the stuff is going to be things that you've already seen before. We'll cover a couple of things that are interesting, like the new wins, but overall my feelings on most of this is basically the way it was in our first tier list, so I would just like refer you to those for all of these guys. But here we have the, in the A, we have Tome of Glades, Inquisition, and Artificing. Glades is just a very powerful ranged tome. It plays really, really well on high, but it also plays pretty well on like most things. The ability to throw Sunder defense down is a big deal, and if you just support the Glade Runners with like 1 or 2 elemental enchantments, they'll do enough damage to earn their keep. And then like, you know, the combination of everything else that you get in the Tome of Glades isn't bad. Like the healing ability is pretty neat, the Entwined Protectors, although they die very quickly once your opponent gets fire damage on the board, these are still pretty good. Healing Sap is nice. Aspect of the Root is pretty powerful. Leaf Skin gives you resistance to everything. So like, this is just a generically pretty good tome. Meaningfully worse than the S tiers, but generically pretty good. But I think like the really big winner here is the Tome of Inquisition. So Tome of Inquisition has gone from being a tome that like answered a question that no one was asking, which is how do you hit something that can't be hit? Because one of the big parts of Inquisitors, of course, is that their bolt is an auto hit, the Bolt of Judgment. So this is now a really important piece for an Order Mage. It used to be that it got 10 extra hit points on Inquisitors, as well as an extra defense and an extra resistance in the past patch, and so they got a lot more beefy, but they still didn't like solve any problems. But now with all this Fey mist nonsense going around, Inquisitors are a lot stronger, and of course they're also existing in a universe where like Order Mages now need to look for damage pieces elsewhere because Shrines of Smiting are way worse, and so I think that makes Inquisitors just like overall meaningfully stronger. And I think that the Tome of Inquisition offering you a strategic spell that deals damage, a very strong, albeit draft based unit. Draft-based strategies, just like briefly summarized, they get stronger and stronger as the game goes on because you're going to get more and more cities with built-up infrastructure to allow you to like push out units. So having draft units on like your tier 3, 4, or 5 tomes is not a problem, but having them on your like really, really low tier tomes can be an issue because you're not going to have an infinite amount of draft on turn 15, like kind of no matter what your build is, nor on turn 25. You're just going to have so much more on turn 45, and because of the way like you can summon things to the board, and these guys get built in cities and you don't have your teleporters built up yet, like draft just like starts off a lot worse and then gets better and better and better. But Inquisitors aren't like hilariously soft anymore, and because they do all of this damage as an auto hit that also usually stuns, I think Inquisitors are good. I think that this is actually a solid option now. It might be a little bit worse than Artificing simply from a meta perspective, because Artificing is really, really good with Barbarians, and Barbarians are just like a very powerful tool overall. You do not need to take Tome of Artificing in order to make Barbarians good. It does make Barbarians better. It gives you 30% extra crit chance on an awful lot of different types of units. It does not apply to your heroes, and of course the hero skill here, Golem Assistant, doesn't give you an extra crit chance either, which is why this really is kind of skippable for Barbarians. Like you want to do as much crit chance stacking on your heroes as possible because they just do so much damage, but you really want your units to be as burly as possible, and that doesn't help here. But Tome of Artificing offers so much in all these different packages that it is a very powerful tome, and getting extra damage on Berserkers on like turn 30 is huge, even if it doesn't like keep them alive. But hey, Iron Golems, they can keep people alive, right? Yeah, as long as nobody hits you with lightning damage, then your Iron Golems are not going to be doing a particularly good job as a front line. All right, so let's talk about our B tier. Tome of Winds is a lot better. it keeps getting better and better. It might even be like something you could consider as a low A tier, but I think it's probably more like a B tier thing. But we do have Seeker Arrows now in Tome of Winds, so this is the +1 range that was on Tome of Enchantment. That's really important if you're trying to do range stuff and you're not playing as high. Zephyr Archers are still quite nice because they do have the always hit here on Zephyr Shot. The AoE is not as big a deal simply because people are going to have a lot of defense in the mid to late game, so this AoE is not going to be nearly as effective as an AoE on a battle mage that inflicts a lot of status debuffs. This is like just pure damage, but hey, it's another always hit, and as we mentioned with Inquisitors, that's really important. And favorable winds, this is a lot better. This gives you half of your movement if you're on land and everything on water. You do not need to be playing on a water map for this to be good. Any extra movement on the strategic layer is very powerful when it comes to playing the game. Being able to get to extra infestations or an Ancient Wonder a turn earlier is huge, and Abducting Cyclone is actually very strong. Like, this is really inexpensive, and a 90% chance to stun as well as displace enemies is really powerful in manual combats, and just like anecdotally pretty good in AI auto resolves. It really depends on what it casts it on. Sometimes it casts it on units that like pull somebody to the edge of the board doing nothing, but sometimes it's actually really good. And if you use this on a summon and you stun it and make it so like the opponent loses an entire turn, then that can be worth the casting points. And then Wind Ragers, these guys are burlier than they look because they do have a huge 60% chance to dodge ranged attacks, but they're very weak otherwise, so I would generally recommend against them, and that is going to be reflected there in that grade for the Tome of Winds, but they're a lot better. The Tome of Souls probably also needs to be talked about a little bit because that is new here as a tier 2 tome. We've reworked Bone Horrors. I think people are going in too much on Bone Horrors, same with Skeletons. Like, they're okay, but these are quite fragile whenever it comes down to it. 3 defense, 2 resistance, 90 HP is not a lot whenever it comes to a tier 3 unit. Like, that's basically tier 2.5 whenever it comes to durability, and because of the huge elemental weakness, the fire and spirit, these things do die pretty quickly. I think if you're trying to use the chaff that Tome of Souls makes available to you, I would generally recommend using Summon Corrupt Soul instead. They are kind of expensive whenever it comes to massing them. You're going to need a lot of souls if you want to use a lot of Corrupt Souls, but they're really easy to mass because like all you need is the casting cost and the souls right there. So if you did your homework and you took the Tome of Necromancy, then using a lot of them should not be a problem. But if you didn't do that, like, you still can consider using the Tome of Souls because you get the Soul Collector ability. So now Soulbound deals 20% damage instead of 10%, as well as this 30% chance of becoming a decaying zombie means that actually taking Tome of Souls without Necromancy is defensible. I still think that overall the package of those together is still quite good. Necromancy on Whiteborn heroes is very strong, but because the low quality of both the Skeletons as well as the Bone Horror reanimation, if you want to be really spicy about using Necromancy, you can wait for a Great Transformation again. There's some ways to do that. But Tome of Souls is still quite good, and because you get the soul binding on your battle mages as well as your supports, then you can use your supports to add soulbound and then use your heroes using the soul collector to do extra damage with their soulbound. So that lets your supports support even more. Yeah, that's pretty cute. I like that, Walker. That's fun. Restore Undead Army unfortunately still kind of like mostly doesn't do anything, but I think Tome of Souls is fine as a B tier. It does pretty well. We have Tome of Summoning. Tome of Summoning, like we did talk about as a tier 3 tome, and I'm not going to go too into detail for this thing, but it is still good. If you get into a big manual fight early and you manage to get an evolutionary summon like a lightning elemental to stick around, then Arcane Supercharge is disgusting. +5 strengthen, +3 resistance, +3 bolstered resistance, and static charge for relatively small cost on a legendary lightning elemental can just like slaughter entire armies all on their own if you're not prepared to fight against it. And then the mind control on Arcane Bond can be really scary. It's just that like this thing also drops off really quickly. That's the big problem that's holding it back here and preventing me from giving this any higher than a B. Because as soon as you start running into control loss immunity on everything, then this tome kind of doesn't do a lot for you. At least the Arcane Supercharge does scale well into the mid to late game, because you can use this on stuff like Baylors and Living Fogs for real value. But overall, I think B tier is fine. Tome of Mayhem, this is just like Tome of Infectious Insanity, but Infectious Insanity is probably strong enough to deserve a B all on its own. It's a really powerful spell. I have unfortunately demoted Tome of the Doom Herald down to C. I might have had it in C before, but if not, it probably deserved to be there. You just don't need it in order to do morale-based strategies. If you want to do morale stuff, keep your units alive and kill your opponent's units. That's like the easiest way to do it. And then there are other things that you can do that do morale manipulation, but like stronger. I think the biggest value you get here is the SPI, and then like the rest of the tome is okay, I guess, but nothing exciting. Scrying, unfortunately, didn't get as big a buff whenever they nerfed phasing, so I think it's still a C tier. And then I did talk a little bit about Tome of Fertility maybe going off in the tier 2 tomes video, so let's talk about why that didn't happen very briefly. So Tome of Fertility, we get the Nymph. The Nymph has here the Seduce ability. This is a very powerful ability that can give you control of an enemy unit. In a manual battle, you take control of the enemy unit, you fight against their friends for a little while, and then whenever the battle comes to an end, before you end it, you just kill the unit by holding down Alt, and then all of your friends, you know, like kill your mind-controlled dude, and then at the end of combat, you get the experience points. But if you're doing auto-resolve, which is what we do for, you know, like the multiplayer standard, then you end up where you seduced a, you know, like a tier 2 unit, and you've taken a fight that was supposed to be 16 experience points, and therefore a level up, and then turned it into 10 experience points and then like not a level up, and that is a big problem for nymphs. They're really good units if it wasn't for the experience point problem, because everything else about this package is really good. And I don't really know how to balance this either, because like when you seduce, this is so huge for combat that like it maybe should come with a cost, but like the cost in terms of experience points is too high, and it really hurts the Tome of Fertility as well as Reavers overall. The tools that Tome of Fertility has here are really cool. I do like the AoE negative stats remove, and it does play pretty well with Tome of Warding, but because of the EXP problem here, and although this is a lot better, now that population is better and food and is just better, and this is buffed a lot, but like Tome of Fertility is still not good. And do not play with Tome of Beacon. Like the Lightbringers still have effectively 0 HP. You'll occasionally see it when it comes to an auto resolve that like you fight against Lightbringers and they mind control your army, and then like your army just eats itself and then you die, and then you think that like the Lightbringers are really really good, and so like you want to bring them, but then you watch a different auto resolve where the Lightbringers mind control your front line, but then like you have a dragon or like one ranged piece, and then you just kill the Lightbringers and then you get your units back, and it's because these have 55 HP, 1 defense and 1 resistance. So like there's a stream where we found a Lightbringer on turn 1 and I just deleted it, and that is basically how you need to feel about these units. They are extremely random whenever it comes to what they give to you, and they have the same problem with the nymphs where they deny you experience points, and then like all the rest of the Tome of the Beacon is just not good. Don't take this tome and you'll be happy. Alright, so here with our tier 3 tomes, this should look pretty familiar. Here up at the top, we do still have the Tome of Devastation as an S tier tome. That's really hasn't changed. It's actually gotten a little bit stronger, because Devastator Spheres are like almost real units now. They actually have enough mobility to deploy and do some real damage. And so this is just a great tome. The biggest downside to it, of course, is that you do need 3 Chaos Affinity, but as long as you're level 12, you can do the reset trick, where you just like reset your ruler for the first time for free, pick 3 Chaos Affinities, choose this tome, reset again for 150 Imperium, and then build your ruler the way you'd want. And then you can pick up kind of like any of these tier 3 tomes. You can't do that with the tier 4 tomes. There you need some existing affinities in order to do a reset switch, but you can still kind of do the same thing, right? If you are level 16, then you have 4 affinities. If you're level 12, you have 3, so you just need a couple of affinity from things in order to unlock them that way. But devastation is just great. The biggest thing against it, I guess, is that like it's not as good on players trying to utilize ranged units, but those are also like harder to get value from, so it's probably the strongest tier 3 right now. The closest competition is the Tome of Transmutation. I think on the previous patch, the Tome of Transmutation was probably the strongest in the game, simply because Transmute Resources seems to have been bugged. It was giving you draft. So you can see here that it says that it converts the mana income into gold production and food, which is very, very strong. But in the previous patch, it was also giving you draft, and Transmute Resources was just like bananas powerful in terms of the economic boost it gave to you. And then you also had Transmutation Circle thrown on top. They introduced that one in the previous patch, but this is a really powerful SPI that becomes effectively a magic material, which does a great job at unlocking these collection bonuses, but also just a great job in terms of just like dumping economy onto you. Like if you just have a start where you don't have Tranquility Pool, that's a pretty big problem for you, unless you get Tome of Transmutation online, and then you just get like whatever sort of resources you need. The only requirement to get good value out of this is that you have cities. So like everything, it doesn't play too well with Chosen Destroyers, but that's okay. Like not a big deal. The other thing I think that's kind of like a pseudo ding against Tome of Transmutation is that like Steel Skin, you cannot take this with the new Astral the major transformation. We'll talk about that whenever we get there. Basically, do not stack negative lightning resistance. It will make your life miserable, but overall, Tome of Transmutation is very strong, and I think the Tome of Vigor also probably should deserve a spot here in the S rank. It's very, very powerful. Whether it's S or A, I think you can go back and forth on. Like I think in the previous iteration, we had Cold Dark as an S tier and Vigor as an A tier, but I think that overall, with the introduction of elephants and the ability to use super growth to make elephant like single model entities out of basically everything, that's very powerful in skirmish, but also just like generically powerful in the game. Single model entities do not drop off in terms of their damage output as they get wailed on, and so it's really, really good for you. And of course, this does apply to all of your racial heroes, and extra HP on your heroes is a really big deal. Tome of Cold Dark, I've moved down to A tier. I think it's still very powerful and could be in the S tier, because you know, like access to the flash freeze is incredibly strong. But this is a universe where people are going to be doing more terraforming thanks to primals, and the fact that like the adaptation traits aren't entirely skippable now. They're still not very good, but they're not entirely skippable, which means that the bonus from Marching Winter is like less set it and forget it. But like flash freeze is still a very powerful thing, and this is a really powerful SPI, and the fact that this is like a blind on a mage ability means that like you're more likely to get it, because you're going to have some status resistance immunity or ignoring on mage people. And then like this is a really great minor transformation, so it's like still a very, very strong package for Tome of the Cold Dark. It's just I think probably a little worse in a universe where people are going to naturally be fighting you on terraforming. We have Tome of Pandemonium as another A tier. Tome of Pandemonium, I think probably I underestimated in our initial run through. The strategy of just utilizing Chaos Eaters to make Balors is very strong, and there's like a really critical thing that I missed that Morgie actually pointed out when it comes to utilizing the Tome of Pandemonium here. It's that you get 30% extra damage on all of your heroes from Vessels of Chaos by just combining this with like literally anything that does automatic status debuffs, like the Tome of the Crucible and Lava Burst there. So this is one of the best in terms of damage scaling for your heroes. Really, really powerful tome, and although this is pretty narrow in terms of its application, the thing that it applies towards, which is getting you early Balors, is very powerful. Havoc magic is mostly skippable. This is pretty good if you're at war with like a free city and you need to do extra farming, because like you did not have a particularly favorable early game when it comes to infestations and you're not playing on regenerating infestations. But like I think overall the Tome of Pandemonium is very, very powerful and does deserve a position here. We also have the Tome of Great Transformation. This one I think is probably a little more defensible in the A tier than the other Necromancy tomes, so I'm going to be brave and put it here. Realistically, it might be a high B, but I think Tome of the Great Transformation is incredibly strong in terms of what it can give to you. You do need to be aware that any undead strategy is going to have some serious problems. The -4 spirit and fire damage means that if you afford your opponent too much time to build up an army and a counter to you, you that your army can just like disintegrate. It's really easy to melt people when you're doing, you know, plus 20 to 30% extra damage to them just based off of elemental types alone, and then you stack strengthened and all that stuff on top of it. And so that's a big problem with Tome of the Great Transformation. But Whiteborn is really strong. Fetid Legion is great for, you know, lots of extra units. Getting Bone Dragons online isn't as impressive as I was hoping it would be. Bone Dragons are, of course, they're tier 4 mythics, which means that they do have an easier time getting up to killing momentum and legend rank, but they're still tier 4 mythics, so they only have 130 HP and like 5 defense and 4 resistance. So these are good units, but not like the most exciting thing in the universe, and that does hold back the Tome of Great Transformation overall. I was really hoping that they were going to take this as an opportunity to upgrade a Bone Dragon up to a tier 5. I would much rather see these things as like tier 4.75 with a tier 5 upkeep cost and have them be really rockin' than like what they are now, which is like a tier 4.25, and have I guess these also have the high upkeep cost, so the upkeep cost problem is still there. But yeah, Tome of the Great Transformation is still pretty good, and it's a great place to work for undead stuff. And you do not need to take other undead things to get good value out of it. I think necromancers are probably the best way to get good value out of them, so like souls is the most skippable of all of them. But you know, just be aware that they do play pretty well together. The B tiers, we have Tome of Teleportation. This was one of the strongest, but unfortunately they nerfed the way that phasing works, so now like phase beasts are a lot worse. They can't just move and phase and attack all in the same turn, and then like assassinate enemy leadership structures with relative ease. And it's important to note on the phase beasts themselves that the phasing, like, I'm gonna save myself displacement effect, this is not always good. I have seen this be devastating for phase beasts where like they take a whole bunch of damage in one hit, but the displacement could keep them alive, and instead it displaces them like into the middle of all of the enemy, who then just like tears them apart. And because they have -4 shock weakness, if they have lightning weapons, these things die really quickly. But phase beasts, they're down, and I think that does bring the teleportation tome down. And the quick phase enchantment is also worse. It's mostly just the teleportation hero skill that keeps this thing up. I think Tome of Amplification probably could be viewed as being stronger than Tome of Teleportation here in our B tier. I'm not sure if this could work its way up into A. Maybe it's more objective for this to be like this, but I like Necromancy, don't at me. It's just that like Tome of Amplification is a lot worse as a tier 3 tome. Tome of Amplification used to be like absolutely necessary for you to take on any build that was remotely serious because of the way that Amplified Minds just like dramatically increased your research rate. But because you're getting this in your tier 3s, you don't have as much time for this knowledge income to pay itself back to you. So you really, in order to get good value out of Tome of Amplification, you really need to be utilizing the stuff like Frenzying Focus and Amplified Arrows, which you can do. Like if you're trying to use High and Glade Runners and go all in on range, then Tome of Amplification is very good. But if you're not making a ranged build, then I think Amplification is skippable now. And so I think in a B tier makes a little more sense. We have the Tome of Sanctuary. This is, I think, identical to where it was on the previous tier list video, so just watch that. And then we have the Tome of the Dreadnought. Now that is a new introduction for us, so let's talk about that a little bit. So the Tome of the Dreadnought gives you some really good stuff. You get a tier 4 mythic, and this has the same bonuses as well as penalties that the dragon does. But unlike the dragon, this thing is a lot more fragile. 100 HP and 1 fewer resistance is pretty spooky to be taking on a really big expensive draft unit like this. It is still pretty strong in the sense that it can do a lot of damage, and combined with tuning kits, as long as you're using supports in your army, which if you're not using supports in your army, please start doing that, then you can get really great damage value out of your ironclads. But you do start entering into realms where, like, if you aren't taking Tome of Alchemy, so that way you have the ability to clear the stun that you sometimes get there, then you're in a lot of trouble, because this is a 2-turn stun that you get from the overcharge thing. 2 turns of stunning that ignores status resistance, because this now ignores status resistance when it checks, is really scary. That's very high risk, high reward. So I think Tome of the Dreadnought deserves its place there in the B tier. Important to note that War Foundry is one of the few ways that you can get extra rank, and the draft is really good. So this is a very solid SPI that you should be looking into. Mostly you skip Artillerist. That's mostly nonsense. But you know, it's a solid tome. Not too bad. Dragons and C is, I think, unsurprising. I think it was ambitious for it to be in the B tier. There are ways to use dragons in a game of Age of Wonders 4, but they're just like really expensive and pretty slow. And you can do some wild cheese to get these things out like ASAP. But like I think overall, in order to get the maximum value out of Tome of Dragons, you kind of need the Evergrowth Sanctuary, the one that gives you the auto evolve ability. Then I could see this thing putting in some work. But otherwise, Tome of Dragons is just like kind of too slow to really pursue. Tome of Cycles I've left in the C tier along with Tome of Subjugation. I think there are some good uses here for these tomes, but the Tome of the Druid of the Cycles is still like kind of problematic. We've gotten a lot of upgrades to Druid of the Cycles over the years or over the months or whatever, but it's still difficult to get value out of in a multiplayer manual battle, because your opponent is going to manage your corpses and like where your dead people are a lot better. And then in auto resolve, the AI is like mostly gonna use this thing as just an assassin. But hey, you know, a 24 damage magical assassin with really good stats and a defense mode that's really nice is not a bad unit for auto resolve, and I have seen it do the resurrection at least once, so it does do something. But I think that Tome of Cycles is still probably one of the worst tier 3s. And then Tome of Subjugation, there are, you know, like every time they bring out a new mount, Tyrant Knights get better and better and better, but they're still in the same place where like, if you want that sort of effect, then just take a Warbreed and haste it. Like, it's easier said than done now that Scalds don't haste, but there are lots of ways to do hasting in the game, and this tome is a lot better than this one, even if the units are like a lot closer than it looks on paper. And then Tome of Necromancy is our worst of our tier 3s, and I don't think that's really changed. Like, you can use this and you can get value out of it in like a really huge, really big, really slow game. But those are not multiplayer games, and not really what you experience with auto resolve only either. Alright, so for tier 4 tomes, I'm going to go ahead and kick us off with the Tome of the Stormborn, because I think that this is a very, very, very powerful tome. Whether or not it's actually like the strongest of our tier 4 tomes, I think is something that you do need to debate and test for yourself, but it is amazingly powerful, and I think is a good way to kick us off with our S tier, tier 4s. So we have the Tome of the Stormborn, we have the Tome of Oblivion, we have the Tome of the Astral Mirror, and the Tome of the Crucible. So what do we get in the Tome of the Stormborn? So first, of course, we get access to the Stormbringer itself. The Stormbringer is a very, very powerful skirmisher unit that deals a lot of damage. The combination of physical and magical means that it's difficult to find ways to like really prevent Stormbringers from putting in work against you. But like the really big highlight for them is, of course, their Throw Storm Trident. This thing has 0 cooldowns, so they can do it as many times as they want. We have always hits, so that thing ignores all of those accuracy penalties. And of course, if you can do anything to increase their range, it offers you ways to do really far attacks without being worried about accuracy penalties. And it's an automatic electrified, which is a really big deal in a 3-hex line. So this is just like a great unit across the board. But I think the real highlight of the tome is the transformation. Now, before we go off and say, oh yeah, this is so unbelievably great, you do need to keep in mind you're losing your mount and leg equipment slots on your heroes. Now, it is a transformation that's going to be affecting all of your racial units, including your Stormbringers itself, and of course your Warbreeds, or your Bastions, or your Awakeners, or your Ancestral Wardens. You know, there are lots of units that you can transform very productively with your Naga transformation, but the transformation on your heroes is not pure upside. Losing the leg and the mount is a big deal, but of course what you get in exchange is like sort of what you were losing with the mount and the leg anyway. You get 40 movement and slip away, which is like you get the slip away boots built in. You don't even have to make them anymore. Amphibious is also quite nice in the event that you're playing on a map where you're going to be able to utilize that. And then the combination of slip away as well as blight resistance and lightning resistance on all of your racial units means that this is a very, very powerful transformation for both auto resolves as well as manual battles. Really, really good. The Stormport I think is probably a little too expensive. We did play around with it a little bit in our game where we continued our Fae of Myths campaign, but I just think that like overall anything that costs 750 production is very difficult to utilize and actually suggest to people. But arcing weapons is insane. This essentially gives all of your heroes the ability of the lightning spear whenever it comes to their attacks. So if you do any sort of damage stacking with strengthened and building a tier 4 weapon for your hero, which you should be doing that, then you can get outrageous amounts of damage here out of the Tome of the Stormborn. Really, really powerful tome. Bounty of the Sea I don't think really does a lot, but it's okay if like some of the spells don't do anything, because like most of what you're getting there in the Tome of the Stormborn is outrageous. Tome of Oblivion I think mostly depends on how much you're willing to abuse Sleep of Oblivion as well as Living Fog, but if you're willing to abuse them, then those are some insanely powerful tools that you got access to. The strategic spell I've come down on because I think that like in order to get good value out of the strategic spell, you do need lots of status resistance shredding, and like yeah, you can cast Flash Freeze and Ritual Insomnia on one stack in the same turn, but like that's not cool. Don't do that. Like, there are cooler things you can do in Age of Wonders 4 than fight people out of combat. The Tome of the Astral Mirror is still very powerful. Like, yeah, they keep nerfing the ability to make clones of things, but overall, the fact that you get access to infinite supports in one combat is really, really messed up. So the best use case for the Tome of the Astral Mirror is the summon Astral Reflections on any sort of like support unit where they're not trying to do damage, they're just trying to add value. And if they can just strengthen like way more units or add extra bolstered resistance or whatever, then you're in a great place for your tier 4 tomes. And then like the other pieces here are like fine in a supporting case, but like this might only have one spell in it and still be a great tome for you. And then of course we have the Tome of the Crucible. I think that you could go back and forth on Crucible versus Golden Realm. I might have talked about this in our tier 4 video because it does sound familiar to me. But Tome of the Crucible, I think with Lava Burst is just like generically stronger than the current setup for Gold Golems. Gold Golems have been reworked a little bit in terms of how you get value out of them. You can't make them undying anymore with tier 5 Tome of Creator, and that pushes the tier 5 Tome of the Golden Realm down meaningfully. And of course Gilded Cleave is also not a multi-hit, so like these things no longer absolutely massacre dragons if you put Strength in 5 on them. Like you do actually have to fight other large units now. And that does hurt the tome overall. But Tome of the Crucible, I think, is definitely here in the S tier for a lot of good reasons, and deserves the out over Tome of the Golden Realm. So we talked about Golden Realm, I guess, accidentally, but that's our first A tier. I think it's still very powerful. And then, of course, we have some really new entrants here for the A tier. So first, we want to talk about the Tome of Astral Convergence, I guess. So the Tome of Astral Convergence used to be one of these tomes that like was hilariously bad and you would skip every single time, and like the only thing really holding it back now is just that there is another tier 4 astral major transformation in Tome of the Stormborn. But Astral Convergence is not messing around anymore. Cascading Power starts at 20 damage now. This means that it is very, very trivial for you to just add lots of stacks of Cascading Power and actually get outrageous amounts of damage out of this thing. It used to like stack up, I think it was like +5 damage every single time, but starting at 5, but it was like so slow that it didn't matter. But starting at 20 means this thing just shreds people until they can start working up lots of resistance, and you get it for free on a tome that gives you a really good major transformation now. The ethereal type is slightly worse. It was better, I think, before when it was +2 spirit resistance and immunity to like almost every single thing under the sun, but I understand if you're going to do that as a major race transformation, like you need to make it a little more reasonable. And +2 defense isn't bad. Just be aware, -4 lightning resistance means that you absolutely cannot take anything that increases your lightning weakness, so do not play around with this in Steel Skin. If you need to do transmutation, then just like skip that research, because that is not bueno. But if you defend your lightning by taking, you know, warding, and you take the Tome of the Golden Realm, and then you take your tier 5 astral, and you've picked up the ability to do extra crits on your maximized magic and your crits guild, then that can be really good. And astral attunement can keep everybody alive and getting extra buffs. Like, I think this is actually like a meaningfully better tome now that both this is better and this is better, and it really could almost be an S tier, except that of course cascading power does slow down in like a big late game. 20 damage isn't going to do a lot on turn 75, but like on turn 40 or whatever, this is something that we encountered when we were trying to stream against Noctis. Cascading power used to be kind of a joke for Noctis. Now it annihilates low tier units, just absolutely annihilates them, and this is a pretty cool ability too. And because if you're doing all of this crit stacking and gilding and whatnot, you're gonna have a pretty easy time taking Arcane Surge on your heroes. So I like Tome of Astral Convergence now. And then of course we also have Tome of the Demon Gate. I think that this probably should not be an S tier, simply because Balors are worse in a universe where everybody has access to control loss immunity due to their mythic units getting it. But Fight for Power is still a very powerful strategy, and it's actually a little bit stronger now that Demonkin makes it so that all of your racial units have the Fiend unit type. So what this means is that with the Tome of Demon Gate now, you don't even have to take Pandemonium in order to use Fight for Power. It is definitely faster, because do not convince yourself that 600 casting points on Demonkin is free. This is a huge investment. But if you do this, and you were playing with the Tome of Devastation and your Warbreeds are tier 4 units, so you can smash 2 Warbreeds together to get a Balor. Oh, and of course their SPI is like actually buildable. It used to be insanely expensive, and now it's just like meaningfully expensive. Alright, and then our last A-tier tome here is the Tome of Supremacy. Now, a really big part of what gives this thing its grade is that Monument of Supremacy is a lot cheaper now. This thing is only 450 cost, and if you're playing around with High, for instance, then Monument of Supremacy offers you enormous amounts of draft, as well as lots of city stability. Now, the city stability is like mostly only useful for High, and so isn't something that you need to be prioritizing for every single build, but the fact that this thing is buildable now, I think is really exciting, and 30 draft is a lot in a bigger game with the way that draft scales up in your cities. Exemplars are really great. I do think that it's a little unfortunate that like most of the time you want the Flying Eagle mount, because it just makes exemplars so good, and that breaks my heart, because I do like having them on elephants. But you can do that too. Like, that's perfectly reasonable, and getting them extra durable is really good, because these things are probably the best shield units in the game, depending on how you feel about bastions. And then of course we have a powerful strategic spell, something that like individually hoses all undead builds all on its own. You have the same thing in the Tome of Devastation, but I think that overall package for Tome of Supremacy means that like you do need to be utilizing battle mages and or, you know, the stability here. Maybe you're utilizing the all allied strengthened Anthem of Victory. This is also a very powerful spell when it comes to manual combats against people, but there's like a lot of pieces here in Tome of Supremacy, and you kind of need to be using multiple pieces of them in order to get the max value here, because Order Mages did get nerfed. We'll talk about that when we get to Tome of Exaltation, but Order Mages got hit on the face, and I do think that needs to be reflected in the grade here, so A, I think makes sense for Supremacy. Down in our B tiers, we have the Tome of the Nature Goddess. I think that this was kind of overhyped. Like, the changes to Awaken Instincts over the years means that like this could be still an S tier depending on how Awaken Instincts plays, but it's still mostly banned even with the changes where it no longer applies to anyone who's control loss immune. That is a big change, because it means that now you can't do Awaken Instincts and Angel Eyes. But like a big problem here for Nature's Wrath is that Horned Gods are not good. I don't know why they're like this, but like, why are you like this, Horned God? Explain yourself to me. But they only have a basic defense mode, and like not warding. They also have some issues where like they're just not as durable as you would expect with 150 HP. These things just like take damage like crazy, and you can kind of see this for yourself whenever you play the game. Like the gold ancient wonders that look like trees, those are usually pretty easy to clear, and it's because the army there is like mostly Horned Gods and like units that are supposed to be supporting, but don't have like all of the support tools. If this thing had warding, then I think this tome might be like one tier higher, because Devolve is pretty good, and Awakened Instincts is like testable now, but it still has issues where like it's either broken or it doesn't do anything, and it's like kind of vacillating between those things here for Tome of Nature's Wrath and in B tier. We have Tome of Reaper. I think that we could make an argument actually for this to be in the A tier as well. I think that just like overall the big problem with Tome of Reaper isn't the Tome of Reaper itself, it's just that there's like a lot of hostility towards undead in the game, and that definitely pushes undead things down. But like the Tome of the Reaper gives you access to Reapers, and these things are absolute units now. The fact that this melee strike with piercing and breaching means that these things just do outrageous amounts of damage, that this is a strategy all on its own. Like, you can do undead stuff and like go all in on skeletons and bone horrors and corrupt souls and blah 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 blah. But if you don't want to do that and you just want to get like most of the payoffs for playing undead, then just take Tome of Great Transformation and Tome of Reaper and make Reapers, and like that's a strategy and it will work wonders for you. And because it was like a mono directional strategy that is weak to a lot of things, I do think that deserves a B tier. But like if your opponent doesn't have a way to counter or interact with your Reapers, then these things will run over them, and so they can be outrageously strong, but you know, easily countered. And then we have the Tome of Severing. Now the Tome of Severing is something where like it's difficult to exactly rate it because it's good against specific enemies, so that's why I mentioned this as being sort of like a sideboard grade location. This is great against enemies that are trying to utilize things that apply statuses that check against status resistance. That's not everybody, so you know, there's some things to target there. There's some people who are going to be stacking a lot of enchantments without having a lot of status resistance themselves. That's where Disruption Blades is going to do a lot of work. But, you know, you're not describing everybody that you're fighting against there. This isn't going to do a lot if your opponent is just doing a lot of buffs in combat, or if they've done a lot of major race transformations or whatever. Like, this doesn't do a lot of work there. Final Banishment is really, really rude against Necromancy, so, like, you know, that's a powerful thing to have in your back pocket. And then Severing Golems continue the disruption thing by just giving you access to a magical disruption over AoE. This is like a really, really powerful artillery piece, more or less, but don't do too many of them. 130 HP, 4 defense, 5 resistance on something that you can't apply transformations to means that like having 17 of these and one hero is not a real strategy. Spell words are cool. I like the Spelljammer effect, especially because Spelljammers are like in the place where you can unban them. And Master of Disruption is a pretty cool ability to have in your heroes, but like you need your opponent to show you that they have a build that's weak to Tome of Severing before you want to take it. If they have a build that is weak to it, if they have something where one of these pieces, or preferably 2 of these pieces, are going to perform above rate, then go ahead, take Tome of Severing. It's also very easy to take because it only requires a combination of 6 of these things. That's like the way that all these hybrid tomes work. If you have 6 Materium and 0 Shadow, you can take Tome of Severing. If you have 2 Materium and 4 Shadow, you can take Tome of Severing. You just need those numbers to add up. But you do need your opponent to like show you, hey, I'm gonna fold to this tome before you want to take it. Tome of Exaltation is a lot worse. Like, it's you can use Copium and like try to describe good opportunities to use this thing, because like Ascended Warriors does level things up pretty quickly, and you can use that to like get full dragons out of Tome of Dragons pretty quickly if that's what you really, really want to do. And Ruler Statue is a lot cheaper. Like, being able to build this thing, you know, the one time more easily is nice. But Shrines of Smiting just got like pounded on the face in this, and I think that's good. These were before kind of like hilariously imbalanced because of the way this worked. So they used to give you Killing Momentum Legend rank Shrines of Smiting using the Ascended Warriors very quickly, and then Smiting Prayer Blast only used 1 action pip. And so what would happen is your Shrine of Smiting would, you know, deal like 150 damage to something, kill it in 1 shot, get killing momentum, kill something else in one shot, and because it was a 1 pip, you could move around a little bit first. It was 32 movement points, but there were ways to haste it. And then you just like would kill people in an alpha strike in like 1 turn with a couple of Shrines of Smiting, and it was ludicrously imbalanced. And if they'd left them as is, it would have made undead like practically unplayable on the current patch. But Shrines of Smiting, the way they are now, are so much worse that I don't think that you should try Tome of Exaltation unless you know exactly what you're doing. I would say if you want to play around with Order, just play with Supremacy. It's a much better tome in the current meta, I think. And then of course we have our last C tier here, our Tome of Chaos Channeling. Like most of my feelings here haven't really changed. I think actually, I don't even know why I wasted time clicking over to this. If you want to know why this tome isn't bad, I said it last time. Go watch that one. And then same with Tome of Paradise. Like this thing is fine specifically for the tier 5 nature tome because of the unit enchantment. But like outside of that, you mostly do not want to be playing with the Tome of Paradise. That is our D tier for our tier 4 tomes. Alright, and that brings us to our tier 5 tomes. Now the tier 5 tomes, I think there is some subjectivity to this. It really is heavily build dependent because you don't have like ways to branch off when it comes to your tier 5 tome, right? If you're playing as Order, you have the tier 5 Order tome. You just are going to have to make the best of what you got. But that said, I think that the nerf to the way that Tome of the Creator works has pushed it down to the A tier. So it used to be that Tome of the Creator gave you access to Eternal Earth, which was giving you undying on all of your constructs because they hadn't really introduced that yet. And so like they were using the gold golems as elementals and they were getting the undying and that was really strong, and you were getting undying on your dragon ruler and that was really strong, and all of the pieces with Tectonic Shatter and Earth Shatter engines was making Tome of the Creator really powerful. But the nerf to Eternal Earth I think really has hurt the Tome of the Creator. So now our S tier tomes, we have the tier 5 Astral, the Tome of the Archmage. Whether or not that is actually like the top kind of depends on whether or not Disruption Wave is unbanned for you. Disruption Wave remains like outrageously good, and if it's banned for you then this is probably more like an A tier, but it is still really good because just like the access to the haste on all of your big guys, especially now that haste is harder to get, is really powerful. And then the Maximized Magic combination with Astral Convergence as well as Tome of the Golden Realm means that it shouldn't be too hard for you to get like really interesting battle mages with lots of opportunities to crit and gild and do lots of really rude CC with the Tome of the Archmage. The Tome of the God Emperor, the Order Tome, is our other tier 5 S tier tome. I think the Tome of the God Emperor we probably evaluated a little weaker than we needed to, just because like I think Exalted Champion generally I encourage people to not play this on their heroes because it's a little overpowered. But if you're using it on your heroes, then the Tome of the God Emperor I think is still an S tier tome when it comes to tier 5. It is very powerful there, and the rest of the tome is quite good. It's just that like the general use case of this on shrines is definitely worse, and in the universe where shrines are worse. So now I think it's a little more forgivable to be casting this onto your killing momentum heroes, but it is pretty unforgivably insane on killing momentum heroes. Our A tiers, we talked about Tome of the Creator already. Tome of Nature Goddess I think we've talked about at length, but it is just like a great utility enchantment for everybody, and the fact that it's only a 3 spell tome I think is mostly good. The Tome of the I forget what the tier 5 Chaos tome is called. The Tome of the Chaos Lord. Of course, it's Tome of the Chaos Lord. The Tome of the Chaos Lord still has like issues where yes, Call Forth Avatar of Chaos can be quite powerful, but like you can't stack this into the same battle, and your ruler is generally going to be in a lot of fights, and then Demonic Onslaught is like very strong whenever you can be guaranteed that you're on the attack, but that's not always going to be the case. And then Summon Balors, if you really want to do this, like you can do that in your tier 4 rather than your tier 5 tome. And then unfortunately like the tier 5 Tome of the Eternal Lord is still kind of not great. Like I want to test this out because I do think that the True Death Magic is something that could be pretty spicy, but there's something that we didn't mention whenever we were talking about this in the patch notes. It's that this cannot be used within an enemy zone of control. So whereas the Reapers, like if we were just evaluating the Tome of the Reaper on the strength of the Reaper itself, then this would probably be an S tier because this is like bananas good now. It's just that like the rest of the tome is kind of meh. But this thing, the Curse of the Reaper ability, is really strong, but if there's an enemy within your zone of control at 3 range is an incredibly difficult setup cost. It's almost nothing when it comes to auto resolves. It's mostly for manual battles, and they're like with everything else, manual battles against the AI are not really representative, I think, of what you're looking for when it comes to Age of Wonders 4 multiplayer. You know, if that's the way you want to play in single player, like you do you, fam. But you need to take into account how is the auto resolve going to use this stuff, and the auto resolve is mostly not going to get great value out of that. The auto resolve would get good value out of Eternal One, though. Like, this is something that does literally nothing in multiplayer because your opponent's just going to stand on your hero. But like in auto resolve, the AI won't do that. It might randomly die on top of your hero accidentally, and then, you know, that'll do the same thing. But overall, Tome of the Eternal Lord just not in a great place. And I hope that we see some buffs in the future, maybe a rework to the way that the Eternal One power works. So that's our Tome's tier list update here for the Wolf patch. I'm not sure which one of these Tome tier lists I'm going to use as the screenshot, but I think we're going to do our next update maybe next week. We're going to do traits and cultures and everything else, because I do want to play around a little bit more with Primal. There have been some things that I've seen that have really impressed me in terms of their economic growth. People have been talking a lot about how like outrageously powerful the summons are, and they are really good, but again, that's like they're really good in manual combats, and whether or not the auto resolve AI is going to use them as well is like not the case, pretty obviously. So how do you get value out of Primal in a universe where you can't abuse the tactical AI is a question I have not yet answered, but it is one I'm looking forward to answering, and something that I hope I have a good answer for you by next week. But for now, that's Walker here with We Play Games. All right, take care.